So hello students. So today we will be looking at another branch of psychology known as educational psychology. And in this module we will be looking at definition, nature, scope and functions of educational psychology. So coming to the objectives of educational psychology, the first one is to appreciate the need and importance of study of educational psychology and in understanding, analyzing and interpreting the development of a learner. And second one is to explore the possibilities of an understanding of processes in human cognition as basis for designing learning environments and experiences at school. So what is educational psychology? So educational psychology is one of the branches of psychology to study the behavior of the learner in relation to his or her education. A specialized branch of psychology which concerns itself with suggesting ways and means of improving the process and products of education, enabling the teacher to teach effectively and the learners to learn effectively with the minimum effort. It is thus designated as the service of education. It has simplified the tasks and improved the efficiency of the teacher or all those connected in the process and products of education by supplying them with the essential knowledge and skills in much need the same way as science and technology has helped in making possible maximum output through minimum input in terms of time and labor in our day-to-day activities. Educational psychology is a branch of psychology which deals with the application of psychological findings in the field of education. In other words, it deals with the human behavior in educational situations. It is a systematic study of the development of the individual in the educational settings. It is a scientific study of human behavior by which it can be understood, predicated and directed by education to achieve goals of life. Now we look at few definitions in educational psychology. According to C.E. Skinner, educational psychology is a branch of psychology which deals with teaching and learning. According to Crow and Crow, educational psychology describes and explains learning experience of an individual from birth to old age. According to E.A. Peel, educational psychology is a science of education. Trow describes educational psychology is a study of psychological aspects of educational situations. According to Stephens, educational psychology is a study of educational growth and development. Judd, he says that educational psychology is a scientific study of the life stages in the development of an individual from the time he is born until the time he becomes an adult. In the words of E.A. Peel, educational psychology helps the teacher to understand the development of his pupils, range and limits of their capacities, the processes by which they learn and their social relationships. Educational psychology, in this way, the work of an educational psychologist resembles with that of an engineer who is a technical expert, and the engineer supplies all the knowledge and skill essential for the accomplishment of the job satisfactorily, for example, construction of a bridge. In the same way, educational psychologist who is a technical expert in the field of education supplies all the information, principles and techniques essential for understanding the behavior of the pupil in response to educational environment and desired modification of one's behavior to bring an all-round development of his personality. Thus, educational psychology is concerned primarily with understanding the processes of teaching and learning that takes place within formal environments and developing ways of improving those methods. It also covers important topics like learning theories, teaching methods, motivation, cognitive, emotional, moral development and parent-child relationships, etc. In short, it is a scientific discipline that addresses the questions: why do some students learn more than others, and what can be done to improve that learning. With this, we look at the nature of educational psychology. The nature of educational psychology can be understood in the following ways. So, first point, educational psychology is a science. Science is a branch of study concerned with observation of facts and establishment of verifiable general laws. Science employs certain objective methods for the collection of data. It has its objectives of understanding, explaining, predicting and control of facts. Like any other science, educational psychology has also developed objective methods of collection of data. It also aims at understanding, predicting and controlling human behavior. The next point in understanding the nature is educational psychology is a natural science. An educational psychologist conducts his investigations, gathers his data and reaches his conclusions in exactly the same manner as physicist or the biologist. The next point, educational psychology is a social science. Like the sociologist, anthropologist, economist or political scientist, the educational psychologist studies human beings and their sociability. Next point, educational psychology is a positive science. Normative science like logic or ethics deals with facts as they ought to be. A positive science deals with facts as they are or as they operate. Educational psychology studies the child's behavior as it is, not as it ought to be. So, it is a positive science. Next point in the nature is educational psychology is an applied science. It is the application of psychological principles in the field of education. By applying the principles and techniques of psychology, it tries to study the behavior and experiences of the pupils. As a branch of psychology, it is parallel to any other applied psychology. Next point in nature is educational psychology is a developing or growing science. It is concerned with new and ever new researches. As research findings accumulate, educational psychologists get better insight into the child's nature and behavior. Thus, educational psychology is an applied, positive, social, specific and practical science. While general science deals with behavior of the individuals in various spheres, educational psychology studies the behavior of the individual in educational sphere only. The nature of educational psychology is scientific because educational psychology is organized, systematic and universally accepted body, wherein the facts remain constantly in search of truth through research and experimentation. It employs scientific methods in its study and its results are subjected to further verification and modification. And the laws of educational psychology are universal. It possesses a well organized, systematic and universally accepted body of facts supported by the relevant psychological laws and principles. Scientific methods in educational psychology are employed and adopted to a scientific approach for studying the learner's behavior such as observation, experimentation, clinical investigation and generalization, etc. And there is constant search for truth. The results of any study in educational psychology can be challenged and are modified or altered in terms of the latest explanations and findings. So, the findings of any study are never taken as absolute and permanent. And there is reliability in educational psychology. It does not accept hearsay and do not take anything for granted. It emphasizes that essentially there is some definite causes which are linked with behavior, and the causes of this behavior are not related to supernatural phenomenon. And as a positive science, educational psychology is a positive science rather than a normative science. It is also an applied behavioral science. Educational psychology is also a developing positive science which cannot claim the status of a developed positive science like other natural or applied sciences. It is considered as one of the developing positive sciences of the learner's behavior. And coming to few of the objectives in educational psychology: to provide a body of facts and methods which can be used in solving teaching problems, to develop a scientific and problem solving attitude, to train in thinking psychologically about educational problems, to develop an understanding and appreciation of the dietary and environmental factors which underline learning ability, to provide base for understanding the nature and principles of learning and to supply the techniques for its improvement, to understand and appreciate the factors influencing individual ability to learn, to provide understanding of the external factors like training aids, libraries, classrooms which are largely within the control of the teacher and the institution, to evaluate teaching efficiency, to develop an appreciation of the individual and importance of the individual with their individual differences and similarities. According to Kelly, in the year 1941, he listed the nature of educational psychology in few points. Number 1, to give a knowledge of the nature of the child, to give understanding of the nature, aims and purposes of education, to give understanding of the scientific methods and procedures which have been used in arriving at the facts and principles of educational psychology, to present the principles and techniques of learning and teaching, to give training in methods of measuring abilities and achievement in school subjects, to give a knowledge of the growth and development of children, to assist in the better adjustment of children and to help them to prevent maladjustment, to study the educational significance and control of emotions, and to give an understanding of the principles and techniques of correct training. Now let us look at the functions of educational psychology. The various functions of educational psychology are: to know the learner, to select and organize the subject matter or learning experience, to suggest art and techniques of learning as well as teaching, to arrange learning situations or environment, to acquaint oneself within the mechanism of heredity and environment, to help in maintaining discipline, to render guidance services, to help in evaluation and assessment, to solve classroom problems, and to know about oneself. Now let us look at the scope of educational psychology. Scope of educational psychology tells us the areas of application. In other words, it can be called the subject matter of educational psychology. In terms of human behavior, it studies human behavior in the educational context. Psychology is the study of behavior, and education aims at modification of behavior. Hence, the influence of educational psychology has to be reflected in all aspects of education. Education versus schooling. Even though schooling is frequently misidentified as education, there is much difference between education and schooling. The term education encompasses basically two meanings. They are formal and informal ways of gaining knowledge, while schooling stands for the initial and secondary stage of formal education system that takes place in school. Next, in terms of growth and development. It studies the principles governing growth and development. The insight provided by the study will help in scientifically planning and executing learner-oriented programs of education. The learner is very important. The subject matter of educational psychology is knitted around the learner. Therefore, the need of knowing the learner and the techniques of knowing him well would be looked into. The topics include the innate abilities and capacities of the individuals, individual differences and their measurements, the overt, covert, conscious as well as unconscious behavior of the learner, the characteristics of his growth and development at each stage beginning from childhood to adulthood are studied. Next, the learning experiences. Educational psychology helps in deciding what learner experiences are desirable, at what stage of growth and development of the learner is, so the experiences can be acquired with a greater ease and satisfaction. Now next is the learning process. So after knowing the learner and deciding what learning experiences are to be provided, educational psychology moves on to the laws, principles and theories of learning. Other items in the learning process are remembering and forgetting, perceiving, concept formation, thinking, reasoning, problem solving, transfer of learning, ways and means of effective learning of the learner are also seen. Learning situation or the environment is also considered. Here we deal with the environmental factors and learning situations which come midway between the learner and the teacher. Topics like classroom climate and group dynamics, techniques and aids that facilitate learning and evaluation, techniques and practices, guidance and counseling, etc. are also studied for the smooth functioning of the teaching learning process. Next bit is evaluation of learning process. Some forms of evaluation are inevitable in teaching. Also in all fields of activity, when judgments are used to be made, evaluation plays an important role. Effectiveness of learning process always depends on the evaluation, as it gives the knowledge of results which helps the learner as well as the teacher to modify or to correct oneself. Educational psychology guides are by explaining the different methods of assessment contributing to the effectiveness of learning process. Individual differences. It is accepted universally that every individual differs from the other. This idea has been brought to light by educational psychology. Next, personality and adjustment. Education has been defined as the all-round development of the personality of an individual. If educational has to fulfill this function, all instructional programs have to be based on the principles governing the nature and development of personality. The teacher is a potent force and is any scheme of teaching and learning process. It discusses the role of a teacher. It emphasizes the need of knowing thyself for a teacher to play his role properly in the process of education. His conflicts, motivation, anxiety, adjustment, level of aspiration are to be seen. It throws light on the essential personality traits, interests, aptitudes, characteristics of effective teaching, etc., so as to inspire one to become a successful teacher. Next aspect is in guidance and counseling. Education is nothing by providing guidance and counseling required for the proper development of the child. This is very true, especially in the light of the extremely complex and problematic situation one has to face in the fast growing world. Educational psychology has come to the rescue by developing principles and practical measures helpful for providing effective guidance and counseling. We can conclude by saying that educational psychology is narrower in scope than general psychology. While general psychology deals with the behavior of the individual in a general way, educational psychology is concerned with the behavior of the learner in an educational setting. Now we look at the relevance of educational psychology. For teachers, educational psychology has contributed considerably to the creation of the modern system of education. The knowledge of educational psychology helps the teacher in the following ways. To understand the stages of development, psychology has clearly shown that human life passes through different stages of development before it reaches adulthood. They are infancy, childhood, adolescence and adulthood. Next is to know the learner. The child or the learner is a key factor in the teaching learning process. Educational psychology helps the teacher to know his interests, attitudes, aptitudes and the other acquired or innate capacities and abilities, to know the stage of development linked with his social, emotional, intellectual, physical and aesthetic needs, to know his level of aspiration, his conscious and unconscious behavior, his motivational and group behavior, his conflicts, desires and other aspects of his mental health. Next is to understand the nature of classroom. Educational psychology helps the teacher to adapt and adjust his teaching according to the level of the learners. A teacher is teaching in a class, but a large number of students do not understand the subject matter which is being taught. Next is to understand the individual differences. No two persons are exactly alike. Pupils differ in the level of intelligence, aptitudes, likes and dislikes and in the other propensities and potentialities. Next is to solve classroom problems. There are innumerable problems like truancy, bullying, peer pressure, ethnic tensions, cheating in tests, etc. Educational psychology helps to equip the teacher by studying the characteristics of the problem children, dynamics of the group, behavioral characteristics and adjustments. Next is to develop necessary skills and interest in teaching. Educational psychology helps the teacher to acquire and develop necessary qualities and skills to deal with the problems created by the pupils, maintain a healthy atmosphere in the classroom and show concern regarding the progress of the child. Next is to understand effective methods of teaching. Educational psychology has discovered several new approaches, principles, methods and techniques of teaching which are very helpful in today's teaching learning process. Next, to understand the influence of heredity and environment on the child. Educational psychology helps the teacher to know that the child is a product of heredity and environment. They are the two sides of a coin. Both play a prominent part in the all-round development of the child. The next point is to understand the mental health of the child. Educational psychology helps the teacher to know what are the factors responsible for the mental ill health and maladjustment of a student and to suggest improvement thereof. And the next one is to understand the process of curriculum construction. Curriculum is an integral part of the teaching learning process. Curriculum should be child-centered and fulfill the motives and psychological needs of the individual because child capacities differ from stage to stage. And the next one is to provide guidance and counseling. Today, guidance to a child at every stage of life is needed because psychological abilities, interests and learning styles differ from person to person. And the next one is To understand principles of evaluation and assessment. Evaluation is an integral part of the teaching learning process. How to test the potentialities of the child depends upon the evaluation techniques. To inculcate positive and creative discipline, the slogan of the traditional teachers earlier was, "Spare the rod and spoil the child." Flogging the child was a chief instrument, but educational psychology has replaced the repressive system with the preventive system. Coming to educational psychology and research. Educational psychologists conduct research to improve the behavior of human beings in the educational situation. For this purpose, it helps in developing tools and devices to measure the performance and suggest remedial measures thereof. To know himself or herself, that is from the teacher's point of view, is also very important. To understand a teacher's behavior patterns, personality characteristics, likes and dislikes, motivation, anxiety, conflicts, adjustment, etc. are to be looked within. All this knowledge helps him or her in growing as a successful teacher. Educational psychology helps in professional growth, changing attitude, and in innovative thinking. Inside the classroom, educational psychology has enabled the teacher to achieve proper conditioning of pupils by achieving and directing classroom programs on human lives. Now let's look at the summary of this module. Education plays an important role in one's life. Without education, one remains unaware about how he or she can make a good difference in the society. Educational psychology helps a teacher to understand her students and students the importance of learning with fun than as a burden. And so far, we have looked at few definitions in educational psychology, nature, functions and scope of educational psychology. How best educational psychology can help one to understand the classroom climate to have a better learning relationship between a teacher and a student.